So today's video is a little bit different than usual, but that's because Aya and I are starting a new series. So basically what the series is going to be called is Halaqah, where we give a little bit of tips and advice that we can implement in our daily lives as a Muslim. So today's Halaqah is going to be about how we are supposed to, as Muslims, treat our neighbors. And I'm going to be providing examples from 3 different sources: the Quran, the Hadith, and the Sunnah of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, modeled the most perfect mannerisms. So we take what he does in his life and then we use that as sunnah in our lives. And through that, I'm going to share with you guys one story that's pretty well known about the Prophet and a story with his neighbor. So at a certain point of time, Prophet Muhammad lived next to a Jewish neighbor. So this neighbor did not respect Prophet Muhammad at all. He actually mistreated him in a lot of ways. And one of the ways that he mistreated Prophet Muhammad was that every morning before Prophet Muhammad would leave his house, this neighbor would take time out of their day to go and take garbage and toss it in front of the doorstep of Prophet Muhammad. And so Prophet Muhammad would have to clean it and fix the way his doorstep looked and everything. And then so one day, Prophet Muhammad just became so expected to see trash on his door. He opened the door to leave his house and there was no trash at all. So he was kind of curious to why there's no trash on the door, because the neighbor would always throw trash there. So he went on with his day and he went and asked someone about this neighbor, where the neighbor is, anything wrong with the neighbor. And then he later found out that the neighbor was sick. Just look at this. So basically, after he found out that the neighbor was sick, mind you that the neighbor is the one that mistreated the Prophet, he took time out of his day to go and visit the sick neighbor. And he was one of the first people that did that too. I mean, that's amazing. Someone who mistreated you and took the time out of their day to come and throw trash to make your life harder. The Prophet was the first one to go and visit the person that was sick. And the Jewish neighbor was so touched by the amount of forgiveness and mercy that the Prophet had on his neighbor that he converted to Islam. And just on a side note, neighbor doesn't necessarily mean like your neighbor, like literally your neighbor. It can be a neighbor this one house away or 20 houses away. It's just the thought. There's also an ayah in the Quran that talks about your treatment towards your neighbors. It's Surah An-Nisa, ayah 36, where it basically says, do good to parents, orphans, al-masakeen, neighbors who are of kin, and neighbors who are strangers. So now take a second and think about that, because it's talking about your treatment towards your parents. Your parents are the ones who raised you and love you and all of that, and they're comparing the way you treat them with the same way that you should treat your neighbors. There's also Hadith Bukhari that says, whoever believes in Allah and the last day should be generous to his neighbor. See, now let's zoom into the word generosity. What does generosity actually mean? It can be translated in many different ways, and some of the ways that you can be generous to your neighbor is once you see them, smile at them, ask them how they are doing. You made some cookies, give them cookies, something like that. And even something like if you know they're traveling or leaving for a couple of days, you don't have to go up and tell them that you're willing to watch their house for them, but just check up on them as you're leaving, as you're exiting, just see if everything's okay and everything looks good. That's just a simple way to show generosity and treat your neighbor with respect. So we covered the importance of treating your neighbor from 3 different sources, which is the Quran, the Hadith, and the Sunnah of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So now that we've discussed how important it is to treat your neighbor well, we can take those little verses from the Quran, the Hadith, and the Sunnah and try to take that and implement that into our daily lives. Honestly, it's not that hard. As you're just leaving your house, you can just smile, ask them how their day is doing. Those simple little things, you'll get hasanat for them, and you are treating your neighbors well. Thank you so much for listening to our first of many Halaqah series to come. Inshallah, you'll take this advice and try to implement that into your daily lives. And wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.